Hello, I'm John McBride. Thank you for joining me today to discuss the introduction of Christianity to Japan with a focus on Nagasaki. First to references, I have provided you with a handout about the history of Christianity in Japan, and this includes my references. You can download it at bit.ly/Goto Christians, or you can use this QR code. These are some of the references I've used, all excellent. In particular, Crystal Whalen's work is amazing. You can see her documentary film on the right there, Or Taya. Truly amazing glimpse at the last vestiges of hidden Christianity on the Goto Islands of Nagasaki. It was made in 1996 and is available streamed on Vimeo on demand. Also, you can see there The Beginning of Heaven and Earth, which is Crystal Whalen's translation of the Bible of the Hidden Christians. Truly fascinating. You can stream Otaya for US $5.95 on Vimeo on demand, or stream it for free through your local library or university. Christianity was brought to Japan by the Portuguese Jesuits in 1549. This is just a very quick summary that we're going to go through in detail. For nearly a century, Christianity experienced a golden era in Japan, with many feudal leaders converting to Christianity. However, for reasons we will examine, a ban on Christianity was enforced in 1614. Following Japan's national seclusion policy of 1641, the last foreign missionary was martyred in Japan in 1644. Christians went into hiding and would continue their faith secretly for almost 250 years. Small statues, such as this one, were used as covert devotional aids. Outwardly, they resemble the Buddhist divinity of compassion, Kannon, but they were venerated as the Virgin Mary. Often incorporated hidden or disguised crucifixes. In 1797, an agreement between the Omura and Goto clans saw 3,000 Omura hidden Christians forcibly immigrated to the remote Goto Islands as farm labor. Japan opened to international trade in 1854, and a Catholic church was built in Nagasaki for the exclusive use of international residents. Hidden Christians in Urakami, a suburb of Nagasaki, revealed themselves to the priest of Oura Church, and this news led to the Christians on Goto also revealing themselves. However, the late Edo shogunate was not yet ready to allow Christianity, and the self-revealed Christians were persecuted and many died. It was not for another 19 years, in 1873, under intense international condemnation, that the new Japanese Meiji government passed laws of freedom of religion. The Goto Christians built churches on the locations of the prisons in which they had been tortured to venerate those who had perished under that torture. Our story begins in 1494, when Spain and Portugal divided up the world under the Treaty of Tordesillas. Japan fell into the sphere allocated to Portugal. Vasco da Gama took no time, arriving the same year into India. He first landed at Calcutta, today's Kozhikode in Kerala state. 16 years later, Portugal forcibly took the port of Goa and established a fortified presence which would act as its base in India for further commercial and naval activities throughout East Asia. Goa was controlled by the Portuguese until 1961 as Europe's last possession in India. The streetscape of Goa today retains this European history. It was returned to India on 19 December 1961, more than 4 centuries after it was colonized. The Sea Cathedral was the largest one built by the Portuguese in Asia. From the new Goa base, it was just 3 years before the Portuguese arrived in China, initially at Neilingding Island, and then almost 44 years later at the better-known Macau Island. Neilingding Island sits in the middle of the Pearl River estuary and is today administered by Shenzhen. Macau was returned to China on 20 December 1999. Macau's renowned landmark is the ruins of St. Paul's Church. The facade survived after the church was destroyed by a typhoon and fire in 1835. The facade was intricately carved between 1620 and 1627 by Japanese Christian stonemasons exiled from Japan. The Jesuits were known for accommodating local culture in their proselytizing. In the facade of St. Paul's, we see the Virgin Mary stepping on a 7-headed hydra. The Chinese characters state, "Holy Mother tramples the heads of the dragon." From China, the Portuguese moved to the Philippines, although the Portuguese captain Ferdinand Magellan claimed the islands for his employer, Spain. Las Filipinas is named for King Philip II of Spain. It appears the Portuguese were content trading between the Philippines and China, and it is not for another 22 years before 3 Portuguese merchants were blown off course on a Chinese junk and landed at Tanegashima in 1543, the first Europeans to arrive in Japan. The 3 Portuguese merchants sold 2 muskets to the local Tanegashima feudal lord, who immediately put a master swordsmith to work copying the muskets. The Japanese master craftsman was able to improve several features, but struggled with the screw technology. He ended up bartering his daughter to the Portuguese in exchange for this technology. His daughter's sacrifice is memorialized, and his lowly daughter is referred to as Princess Wakasa. The muskets were called Tanegashima. Within 10 years of introduction, over 300,000 Tanegashima muskets were manufactured in Japan. 32 years later, in 1575, the muskets were used in a turning point in Japanese history by Oda Nobunaga, the first great leader to begin the process of ending the Warring States period and uniting Japan. You can clearly see the effective use of muskets by the Oda and Tokugawa forces against the powerful Takeda clan. The Takeda perhaps should have rightfully ruled Japan, but lost 2/3 of their forces to these new weapons in this single battle. Now, it's important to keep in mind Oda Nobunaga's reliance on these muskets and his memory that this technology came from the Portuguese, who would also introduce the Jesuits to Japan. And so Oda Nobunaga was perhaps better disposed towards the Jesuits than we might otherwise imagine. Christianity arrived in 1549 when Francis Xavier, one of 2 founders of the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, arrived in Kagoshima. His arrival at Kagoshima is memorialized, and a memorial church and statues of Xavier in the back, Anjiro and Bernardo in the front there also stand in Kagoshima. Anjiro stands on the left and was Japan's first Christian. He fled Japan after killing someone and met with Xavier in Portuguese Malacca, Malaysia. He returned to Japan with Xavier as his interpreter. Anjiro would die a pirate in China after being driven out of Japan following Xavier's departure. In the forefront is Bernardo, a Christian name for a young Japanese man who left Japan with Xavier and was the first Japanese to visit Europe. From Kagoshima, Xavier travelled up to Hirado, the top left there, where he received a warm welcome from the local daimyo, or feudal lord, Matsura Takanobu. Matsura's conversion to Christianity caused his subjects to convert en masse, and Hirado became a hub of Christianity. From there, Xavier travelled by sea to Hakata and then on to Yamaguchi, the Kyoto of the West, where he was again warmly welcomed. He spent the Christmas of 1550 in Yamaguchi, and so Yamaguchi prides itself as the birthplace of Christmas in Japan. Xavier was determined to meet the emperor, and so he continued on to Kyoto. But Kyoto was in ruins, and he was refused an audience with the emperor and the shogun. He quickly returned to the merchant port of Sakai, near Osaka, where he met with wealthy Sakai merchants. And then he traveled back to Yamaguchi, sailing through the inland sea of Japan. A monument in Sakai commemorates his visit. It reads, on a certain day in 1550, St. Francis Xavier landed here at Sakai and became a guest in the mansion of Ryoke Hibiya. From this memorable day dates the advent of Occidental civilization in Japan, which added much to the fragrance of the modern culture. Now, the great tea master Sen no Rikyu refined the tea ceremony, which is performed to this day. And he was born in Sakai and was an influential merchant in Sakai. He was 28 years of age when Xavier visited his city. At the time, Rikyu was studying tea ceremony under Takeno Jo, and he was studying Zen Buddhism at Kyoto's Daitokuji Temple. Rikyu would later become Oda Nobunaga's tea master from 1579. That was 29 years after Xavier's visit, and Toyotomi Hideyoshi's tea master from 1582. Now, we link tea ceremony with Zen Buddhism, and it may be a stretch to associate some of the movements in the tea ceremony to the Catholic Mass. However, the merchants of Sakai were incredibly cosmopolitan. They conducted trade with the rest of the world, and many of the objects in tea ceremony were imported from abroad, some from as far away as Turkey, across the Silk Road, such as tobacco trays, which I can still find in markets in Turkey today, or from Indonesia, such as those wonderful Balinese gongs, and of course ceramics from Korea and beautiful Ming China, and from the rest of Southeast Asia. But whenever I observe tea ceremony, I do think of the use of the cleansing materials used, the corporal and the pall that are used in Mass, the two cloths you see on the left there. I'll skip this detail. You can pause and read if you want to. And I think that perhaps was some influence on Rikyu in how he designed the use of fabrics in the tea ceremony in cleansing the tea ceremony utensils. This is called Fukusa Sabaki. And the host will first cleanse the tea caddy. You know, if there are any Catholic priests out there watching, I'd really be interested in your comments. So the tea caddy is cleansed and protected from impurities. The inside of the lid is gold, which would show up any impurities, meaning poisons. And then the chashaku is purified, the scoop that will scoop up the precious powdered green tea. Wonderful. And thank you to Santoan, a wonderful Omote Senke school of tea ceremony for this video. Please consider subscribing to them. An impressive memorial church stands in the center of Yamaguchi City. Xavier was born in the Basque country. He studied theology in Paris and was ordained in 1537. The Jesuits were formed sorry, I'll just go back. The Jesuits were formed in 1540 by Ignatius, who was Xavier's companion at the university in Paris. And Xavier was appointed the first Jesuit missionary in 1540, traveling to the East Indies. Xavier departed after 2 years, and the greatest man of the Jesuit missions in the East after Xavier was Alessandro Valignano. Valignano met with Oda Nobunaga, the first great unifier of Japan, in 1569. He presented Nobunaga with a large mirror and received permission to conduct missionary work in Kyoto. Valignano brought an African slave with him in 1579 and later presented the slave to Nobunaga, who gave him the samurai name Yasuke. Yasuke became a bodyguard to Nobunaga and was with him when he died. Yasuke was afforded the status of samurai, the first non-Japanese to receive this status. Nobunaga reportedly tried to scrub the black off Yasuke's skin. Both Valignano and Yasuke were very tall and must have been imposing figures in Japan. Valignano was based in Macau, but maintained a particular focus on Japan and made 3 extended visits. Kano Naizen's screen, Arrival of the Southern Barbarians, from 1600, shows a European ship arriving at a Japanese port. A group of capitans alight from the ship, accompanied by an African slave holding an umbrella, much like Yasuke accompanied Valignano as his valet. They are welcomed by Jesuit missionaries, Franciscan monks, and Japanese Christian converts. Children are delighted by the unusual Franciscan monks. Traded goods, including silks from China and rare animals, are unloaded. That's probably a civet cat there. The Karamono, literally Chinese goods store, sells traded goods such as silk fabrics and ceramics from China, and tiger and leopard pelts. At the back of the Karamono shop is Nanbanji Temple, where a Christian mass is held in front of the altar with a statue of the Messiah clearly visible. The crew of the ship take a moment to relax after the dangerous ocean crossing. So Kano Naizen's screen is a wonderful representation of European or Nanban trade, where trade and missionary work were integrated, with the main focus being on intermediary trade. And thanks to the Kobe City Museum collection for the use of this image. The screen is out on display occasionally, so always call or look at the museum's website to double check whether it's out or not. When Valeriano first met with the great unifier of Japan, Oda Nobunaga, Nobunaga was at the height of his powers. His castle was the first great castle keep of Japan, built at Azuchi alongside Lake Biwa, removed from the dangers of fire in Kyoto, and overlooking major land and water transportation routes, the water route on Lake Biwa and the two major highways of the Nakasendo and Tokaido. Nobunaga permitted Valeriano to build a seminary in the grounds of the castle in 1580. Incredible. And remember back to those muskets that Oda Nobunaga had used to succeed in unifying Japan. He also permitted a church to be built in Kyoto, which was likely a converted temple structure. Valeriano advised 3 Christian daimyo to send an embassy of 4 young men to Rome in 1582. And I've provided all of the details of the 4 young men there, which you can pause and read at your leisure. They all would meet Pope Gregory XIII in 1585. The 3 Christian daimyo, or feudal lords, who sent the embassy of 4 young men were Oura Sumitada from Nagasaki, Arima Harunobu from Amakusa, and Otomo Sorin from Oita. They were central figures among many other Christian daimyo. This was truly the golden age of Christianity in Japan. Christianity had flourished on Hirado Island after Daimyo Matsura converted. However, later retainers rejected Christianity and Jesuits moved their trading port to Yokoseura in the Omura domain. Omura Sumitada, the feudal lord, was baptized in 1563 and he took on the name Bartholomew. After Yokoseura was razed by Sumitada's opposing forces, the Jesuits moved to the small, tiny fishing port of Nagasaki. But with them, hundreds of Japanese merchants and laborers arrived from around the country to continue trade with the Portuguese. Nagasaki was ceded to the Jesuits in 1571 after constant attacks by Omura's enemies. Sumitada retired to a villa on the far shore of Omura Bay. You can still visit his villa. He died in 1587, just before the second great unifier of Japan, Toyotomi Hideyoshi, banned Christianity. At Nagasaki, the town flourished and it was known as Little Rome, with the most prominent structure in the town being the 1571 St. Paul's, the church at the promontory. Now, the tip of the promontory was where Dejima would be constructed 61 years later. Dejima is a man-made island which was used for 2 years by the Portuguese and then by the Dutch traders for nearly 2 centuries. When the Dutch moved to Dejima, the church was replaced by the branch office of the magistrate sent by the shogunate, which carefully monitored trade with the Dutch and the Chinese. Today, a small monument stands where the church stood overlooking Dejima. Dejima is an important and carefully reconstructed archaeological site. The fan shape of the original island can be seen in this aerial photograph, although landfill and city buildings now surround its outer seawall. The original single bridge to the island has recently been reconstructed in a contemporary form by Ney and Partners, a Brussels-based architectural firm. Following Oda Nobunaga's assassination, his great general Toyotomi Hideyoshi seized power. Hideyoshi was initially lenient towards the Jesuits. He told Jesuit Gaspar Coelho that if the Jesuits provided large-scale ships for Hideyoshi's planned invasion of China and Korea, 1592 to 1598, he would allow churches in the captured lands. But Hideyoshi became increasingly wary of the threat to political unity that Christianity represented. In 1587, to everyone's surprise, he ordered the expulsion of Catholic priests from Japan. But little came of these expulsion orders. The following year, he abrogated Jesuit control of Nagasaki, but accepted missionaries to protect lucrative foreign trade. However, in 1596, the Spanish galleon San Felipe was shipwrecked at Urado Bay along the Shikoku coastline, the Pacific coastline of Shikoku there. And you can see the trade galleon. It was used for trade between the Philippines and Mexico. It used the trade winds. Problem was the shipwrecked San Felipe crew members in Japan boasted that missionaries had been sent to Japan to prepare the local population for colonization by the armies of Spain. This led to a severe crackdown on Christian priests. 6 Franciscans, 15 tertiaries, and 3 Japanese believers from Nagasaki, including St. John of Goto, were rounded up in Kyoto and marched to Nagasaki, where they were martyred. A monument and church stand opposite Nagasaki Station today at the location of the crucifixions. And 2 popes have visited this site since. This painting was completed in 1869. It was commissioned by Father Petitjean of the new Oura Church built in Nagasaki. The church was built to commemorate the martyrs, and he commissioned the painting when he attended the First Vatican Council. The painting was damaged in the atomic blast of 1945. It was restored, and it hangs in the Oura Church today. The martyrs were all canonized in 1862. Hideyoshi died a year after the 26 were martyred in Nagasaki. Tokugawa Ieyasu, the third and final great unifier of Japan, came to power in 1603 and moved his seat of government to Edo, today's Tokyo. Ieyasu initially tolerated the Christians also, as he was keen to encourage peaceful commercial exchange with Southeast Asia. He issued permits to Red Seal ships. They were in fact armed trading ships, and most continued to use Nagasaki as a base. Nagasaki's status quo was interrupted when Arima Harunobu attacked a Portuguese carrack off the coast of Nagasaki. This was in retaliation for an attack on Arima's own ship near Macau by the Portuguese. Initially, Ieyasu sent Okamoto from his own court to congratulate Harunobu for his brave stand against the Portuguese, but discovered that Harunobu and even Okamoto were both Christians, and so he had both of them executed. In 1612, Ieyasu banned foreign religion in Nagasaki and extended this to all of Japan in 1614. And this began the full-fledged persecutions against Christians. Meanwhile, the defeat of the Spanish Armada by the English in 1588 turned English and Dutch commercial enterprise interest towards East Asia. By the 1570s, Francis Drake had completed the second ever circumnavigation of the world, and by the end of the 16th century, English pilots were keenly sought after. In this context, the young English pilot William Adams arrived in Japan on De Liefde, a Dutch East India Company trading vessel. It foundered off the coast of Oita Prefecture in Kyushu, and Adams was brought before Ieyasu, who immediately accepted him as an advisor on shipbuilding, navigation, and armory. Advised by William Adams, Ieyasu issued a free trade agreement to England and Holland, countries that, as Adams explained, promoted trade and eschewed religious activity. Ieyasu's grandson, the third Tokugawa shogun, would order the construction of Dejima in 1634. He forced all Portuguese to live on the island, which was not considered Japanese mother soil. 2 years later, he banned Portuguese from Japan and forced the Dutch, who were trading out of Hirado, to move to and trade from the tiny man-made island of Dejima. The Dutch would use this small commercial and residential base for the next 220 years, and this would be the only Europeans allowed contact with Japan during its long period of national isolation. Now, I should qualify this statement by saying that after 1774, the year of publication of a medical text called the Kaitai Shinsho, the Japanese actively sought knowledge from overseas through text form, and many books were translated as long as they did not refer to Christianity. By 1637, over 20 years since the strict ban on Christianity, Japanese leaders reasonably assumed that Christianity no longer existed in Japan. They were mistaken. The people of Shimabara domain, who had been allowed to practice their faith under Arima Harunobu, who'd gone to battle with the Portuguese, he was executed, they were experiencing severe mistreatment under the new but cruel daimyo Matsukura, who had replaced Harunobu. They revolted against the tyrannical Matsukura and for 4 months held their ground against shogunate forces at Hara Castle. Even the Dutch lent a hand to bomb the Christians in the castle. The rebellion was led by a young, charismatic Christian boy, Amakusa Shiro. 37,000 Christians would eventually be slaughtered at the castle site. This is Amakusa Shiro's battle flag, and there's a museum dedicated to him on the Amakusa Islands. The castle site is located along the beautiful Ariake Sea. Now, when the Dutch lent a hand bombing the castle, the Dutch ship De Riep fired on the castle. Amakusa Shiro questioned the shogunate forces, and he said, are there no longer courageous soldiers in the realm to do combat with us? And weren't they ashamed to have called in the assistance of foreigners against our small contingent? Shiro was beheaded and his severed head put on display outside Dejima in Nagasaki. The Shimabara Rebellion was the catalyst for the Tokugawa shogunate to sever relations with Portugal and to compel the Dutch to move their trading post from Hirado to Dejima. Nagasaki rebounded as even more merchants and laborers arrived from all over Japan. 30,000 residents engaged in trade and shipping. Nagasaki Township functioned like a huge commercial enterprise. A local daikan assisted the magistrate dispatched from Edo. And another view of Nagasaki then and now. All churches in Nagasaki had been destroyed in 1614, and St. Paul's, also known as Our Lady of Assumption Church, at the tip of the promontory, was replaced with the magistrate's office. By the late 1620s, all citizens of Nagasaki had to undergo efumi, or annual trampling on an image of Christ or Maria, stating that they were not Christian. This turning out of every home in Nagasaki eventually turned into the Nagasaki Kunchi Festival, which continued long after the last Christian had been hunted out. It was a way for the locals to see the cloistered Maruyama courtesans, and remains a huge celebration in Nagasaki today. The Nagasaki Magistrate's Office had 20 images of Christ to trample on, and 19 still exist today. They're all held in the Tokyo National Museum and are often on display. Written oaths were extracted, promising both Japanese gods and Christian saints that the person concerned was not a Christian. Now, the Nagasaki Kunchi Festival remains a popular celebration, conducted 7 to 9 October annually, and 2024 is the 391st year. It's a mixture of Dutch, Chinese, Japanese culture, and still features the Maruyama courtesan. With the courtesans, the great fanfare. These trading ships, Dutch, the VOC, Dutch East India Trading Company. Fantastic. Now, despite these persecutions, hidden Christians persisted with their faith, worshipping tiny crucifixes of Christ and images of the Maria Kannon. This important statue is also in the Tokyo National Museum. It is one of the items confiscated during the Edo shogunate's third crackdown of Christianity in the village of Urakami in 1856, just in the suburbs of Nagasaki. Hidden Christians had repurposed imported statues of Kannon, the goddess of mercy, into the Virgin Mary and worshipped her in secret. A Maria Kannon statue is often indistinguishable from an actual statue of Kannon. We can infer that this statue was indeed worshipped as Maria Kannon based on how it was found among the articles confiscated from Christians. This rosary was confiscated during the Edo shogunate's fourth crackdown of Christianity in Urakami village in 1867. It was one of the rosaries and crosses that Father Petijan, the first father of the Oura Church, had given to hidden Christians who had revealed themselves to him. This bottle was used for holy water, and the stick used to sprinkle holy water in baptisms. The main concentrations of hidden Christians were in more remote areas, Hirado and Ikitsuki Islands, Nagasaki, Sotome, and the 3,000 farmers, Christian farmers, were sent across to the Goto Islands from here, and Amakusa, where the 37,000 Christians were killed at Hara Castle. Now, in 1797, when the Goto domain submitted a request to the Omura domain for settlers to cultivate undeveloped land, some 3,000 Christians from the Sotome area volunteered. Many actually were forced to move to the islands. It was a way of getting rid of the hidden Christians. Life for the Christians was not much easier there, but at least the people gained some measure of religious freedom. After time, their grasp of the tenets of Christianity became increasingly tenuous, and Buddhist and Shintoist elements seeped into their religious beliefs. They would gather in small groups to avoid suspicion. The meetings were called confraria, from the Portuguese confraria. The community was led by Cho Kata, who administered the religious calendar, a Mizu Kata, who administered baptisms, and a Kikiaku, who was in charge of communications. They gathered in secret to recite prayers called orasho, from the late Latin oratio. And all of this is described so well in the documentary Otaya. Now, Japan opened to the West in 1858 following the completion of a treaty which gave trade and residency rights to the US, UK, Russia, France, and the Netherlands. 3 treaty ports were established at Hakodate, Yokohama, and Nagasaki. Nagasaki began a huge reclamation project at Oura, and by 1860, international merchants were pouring into Nagasaki, building a Western-style landscape along the Oura Bund. The Oura Bund buildings were an amalgamation of Japanese and European styles. Rough sketches of buildings by European owners would be interpreted freely by Japanese carpenters. Some of the buildings survive, including the HSBC building completed in 1904 by architect Shimoda Kikutaro. The elegant 1863 home of Thomas Blake Glover, a Scottish arms trader, stands in Glover Gardens with fine views over Nagasaki, a must visit. Next door is the equally elegant Alt House. And the Oura Catholic Church stands at the base of the hill upon which Glover House stands. It was built by the Paris Foreign Mission Society, who took responsibility for the Nagasaki area. The missionary residence was built first, and Father Bernard Petitjean arrived in October 1863, and the church he built was consecrated in February 1865. The Japanese government's strong understanding was that the church was for the exclusive use of foreigners in Nagasaki. It was constructed by the master carpenter Koyama Hidenoshin, who also built the Glover and Alt homes. The Gothic-style church had large lettering in Japanese on the front stating Tenshudo, or church, an illegal but obvious invitation to locals. The church was damaged in the atomic bombing, and artifacts from the damage are in the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. Today, white stucco brick encases the original wooden structure. This extension work was completed in 1879. And protected it from the atomic bombing. In 1953, it was designated a national treasure and was the only Western-style building to receive this honor until 2009. The Holy See bestowed on it the status of minor basilica in 2016. The interior of the building remains largely unchanged since it was first constructed. The high vaulted ceilings, typical of Gothic places of worship, were constructed using wooden reinforcements known as rib vaults, commonly known as bat-shaped ceilings, rather than stone, as is common in Europe, testifying to the skill and ingenuity of Japanese carpenters of the time. The ceiling is made of bamboo woven in a distinctive way and clay, impossible to recreate today. The roof of Oura Cathedral is made of Sangawara pantiles, which were invented and widely used from the mid-Edo period. They were used on private homes. Now, in March 1865, Father Petitjean reported 12 to 15 men, women, and children were standing in front of his church. They were from Urakami. Father Petitjean would discover that almost all Urakami villagers were Christians. Despite 250 years of isolation, the Christians of Urakami had persisted. A woman, Sugimoto Yuri, baptized as Isaberina, was the first to reveal her faith to Petitjean, to Father Petitjean. She told him, "The heart of all those present is the same as yours." The Nagasaki magistrate initially turned a blind eye to these hidden Christians, even as 4 secret chapels were erected in Urakami, and Petitjean would visit these chapels to receive, to give mass. A monument in the grounds of Oura Church commemorates this revelation. Now, the impoverished people of Urakami brought donations to Oura in 1866, and Father Petterjan used the donations to install the Our Lady of Japan statue on the 2nd of June, 1867. The Nagasaki magistrate attended and shook hands with Father Petterjan. 1 month later, the Urakami Christians were rounded up. A Maria statue that survived the atomic bombing is known as the Burnt Virgin. The statue resides in the rebuilt Urakami Cathedral. Father Petterjan created a Latin-Japanese dictionary. Now, the catalyst for the persecutions was a private Christian burial. All burials had to be attended by a Buddhist priest. An Urakami resident conducted a private Christian burial, and on being questioned, he stated his intention to sever ties with Buddhism. He exposed the entire Urakami Christian community. As a result, on 15 July 1867, magistrate spies burst into the Santa Maria Sanctuary, one of the 4 secret Urakami chapels. 68 people were arrested. They faced brutal torture, despite the French ambassador pleading with Shogun Keiki. The new Meiji government was inaugurated on the 24th of January, 1868. It advocated Shintoism as the new state religion, and the ban on Christianity remained. All Urakami Christians were exiled to other parts of Japan. The persecutions lasted until 1873, when foreign pressure finally persuaded Japan to allow religious freedom. In the end, 3,600 Urakami Christians were banished, and 650 of them died in the final wave of persecutions. Meanwhile, on the Goto Islands, hidden Christians also revealed themselves, and they were persecuted. They were held in makeshift prisons using this type of farmhouse. They were not well fed. They were kept in incredibly crammed conditions. They had to stand up, and many died. Now, the farmhouse structure you saw survives and memorializes those who were martyred here. This farmhouse was located in Kusuhara on Fukue Island, one of the 5 main islands of the Goto Islands chain. 35 hidden Christians were imprisoned here. After 1872, the locals built churches near the location, many locations of the persecutions, to venerate their martyrs. In this case, Kusuhara Church stands near the old farmhouse prison you just saw. It is one of the many, many fine churches that stand on the Goto Islands in remembrance to the martyred hidden Christians. Please watch my separate YouTube on the Goto Islands and the hidden Christians churches. They're incredibly beautiful and very interesting history. When the national ban on Christianity was finally lifted in 1873 and the exiled Urakami Christians returned to Nagasaki, Father Petterjan, rector of Oura Church, began construction on this divinity school, which is one of the first wooden structure brick buildings in Japan. Completed in 1875, the school was used as a rectory and from 1926 as a meeting hall, and survived the atomic bombing. Meanwhile, in Urakami, the villagers purchased the land of the village headman where the torturing had occurred. And like in Goto in 1895, they constructed or started construction on the Urakami Cathedral. It would become the largest Christian structure in Asia until the atomic bomb was dropped above it at 11:02 a.m. on the 9th of August, 1945. The hypocenter was directly above the cathedral in Urakami district. 2 priests and 18 faithful perished in the ruins of the building. Of the 12,000 Catholics living in Urakami at the time, 8,500 perished in the atomic bombing. The remains of the entrance to the cathedral have been preserved carefully in the Nagasaki Atomic Bomb Museum. This is the new cathedral. It stands slightly to the side of the Nagasaki Peace Park. The monument to the 26 martyrs stands across from Nagasaki Station. Oura Church was built in their memory. The Suwa Shrine is where the Nagasaki Kunchi Festival is based. Mount Inasayama is reached by a cable car and provides one of the top 3 night views in the world. And the Peace Park consists of the Atomic Bomb Museum and the ruins of the cathedral. The Nagasaki Peace statue stands in the Peace Park, created by sculptor Kitamura Seibo from Shimabara, Nagasaki. The statue's right hand points to the threat of nuclear weapons, while the extended left hand symbolizes eternal peace. The mild face symbolizes divine grace, and the gently closed eyes offer a prayer for the repose of the bomb victims' souls. The folded right leg and the extended left leg signify both meditation and the initiative to stand up and rescue the people of the world. The statue represents a mixture of Western and Eastern art, religion, and ideology. Installed in front of the statue is a black marble vault containing the names of the atomic bomb victims and survivors who died in subsequent years. And this is the Nagasaki night view from Mount Inasayama. It's not to be missed, said to equal that of Hong Kong and Rio de Janeiro. Today, about 2 million or 1.5% of Japanese identify as being Christian. The Christian community is split roughly equally between Catholics, many of whom trace their Catholicism back to the earliest days of hidden Christianity, and the other half are Protestant, mainly converting under post-World War II evangelism from the United States. Some of the most beautiful modern churches can be found in Japan. The father of Japanese modern architecture, Tange Kenzo, who was also a Christian, built the important main cathedral in Tokyo in 1964, and the famous contemporary architect Ando Tadao, who works with introducing light into his concrete structures, built the impressive Church of Light in Osaka in 1998. On the Protestant side, the Tokyo Union Church along Omotesando, the fashion center of Tokyo, was built in 1980 by Edward Suzuki. So thank you for listening. Please watch my YouTube on the hidden Christians of the Goto Islands. Thanks very much.